Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is arguably the ultimate corporate tragedy, trying to decode the supreme paradox of a fallen tech giant. Now, when we think of massive technology empires collapsing, we usually just assume they were blind to the future, right? We assume they simply couldn't see the disruption coming. But today, we're looking at a story that completely shatters that assumption. We're talking about Kodak, a company that stared directly at the future, literally held it in their own hands, and chose to look away. Think about this absolute mystery for a second. How does the very company that created the digital photography revolution become its absolute biggest casualty? It's a fascinating, almost unbelievable contradiction. Kodak didn't miss the digital revolution. They actually invented it. So why on earth did they fail? Let's unpack the technological evolution, the corporate psychology, and the hidden history that led to their dramatic downfall. Chapter 1: Kodak's Golden Empire. To truly understand the magnitude of this fall, we first have to establish the sheer, untouchable scale of Kodak's monopoly in the chemical film industry. Before pixels, there was film, and Kodak was the undisputed king. To put some actual numbers to this dominance, by 1976, Kodak accounted for a staggering 90% of film sales and 85% of camera sales in the United States. They weren't just a participant in the global photography market, they were the market. They operated massive, sprawling factories. The term Kodak moment wasn't just a marketing slogan, it was a global cultural phenomenon. If you captured a memory anywhere on Earth, odds are you were using Kodak film and developing it with Kodak chemicals. Their empire was built on an incredibly lucrative strategy often called the razor and blades model. Kodak would sell you a camera dirt cheap, sometimes almost taking a loss on it just to get it into your hands. Why? Because the real money wasn't in the hardware at all. The massive, recurring, ridiculously high-margin revenue came from the consumables. It was the film you constantly had to buy and the chemical processing required to develop those photos. Those chemicals were relatively cheap to manufacture, but consumers gladly paid a premium for the magic of seeing their photos come to life. It was a perfect, self-sustaining money-making machine. Chapter 2: The Secret Digital Camera. Get this, the seeds of Kodak's destruction weren't planted by some scrappy startup in a Silicon Valley garage. They were planted right inside their own corporate labs. Back in 1975, a Kodak engineer named Steve Sasson actually built the world's very first digital camera prototype. Now, it was the size of a toaster. It took highly pixelated black and white images at a resolution of just 0.01 megapixels, and it took a grueling 23 seconds just to record a single image onto a cassette tape. But the fundamental technology of capturing an image without chemical film was born right there, decades before the consumer digital market even emerged. So what did they do with this world-changing breakthrough? Well, they locked it away. Kodak didn't lack vision. The engineers absolutely saw the potential, but corporate leadership looked at this toaster-sized device and saw a direct, terrifying threat to their cash cow. The strategic conflict was immediate. I mean, why would a company that makes billions selling chemical film introduce a technology that doesn't use film at all? They actively chose to suppress their own technology to protect their legacy. Chapter 3: Protecting the Past. This is where we hit the fatal contradiction. Put yourself in the shoes of a Kodak executive back then, getting graded strictly on quarterly profits. You've got the film model relying on recurring revenue, massive chemical labs, and delivering incredibly high margins, upwards of 70%. Then you look at the digital model. It's a one-time hardware purchase, consumers don't need to buy film, and they definitely don't need to pay for chemical developing. In the early days, shifting to digital meant trading a highly lucrative consumable business for a terribly low-margin hardware business. For leadership staring at a spreadsheet, going digital didn't look like a revolution, it looked like financial suicide. Imagine the mindset required to actively ignore your own invention. This perfectly defines organizational inertia. Executives were just paralyzed. They were so spectacularly successful at doing one thing that they couldn't pivot to doing another. Even when Kodak finally did dabble in digital later on, their primary goal was to use digital screens merely as a gimmick to drive people back to printing photos on paper. They completely missed the point of the screen itself. Their past success became a heavy anchor that made it impossible to sail into the future. Chapter 4: The Digital Revolution Arrives. The thing is, you can't keep a good idea locked in a closet forever. It eventually became a weaponized invention. Other, much more agile tech companies eventually developed their own digital sensors. Sony, Canon, Nikon, These rivals took the very digital pixel technology that Kodak had pioneered decades earlier and aggressively weaponized it against them. The market started flooding with consumer digital cameras, and Kodak was suddenly playing an exhausting game of catch-up in an industry they themselves had invented. The disruption happened in brutal stages. First, standalone digital cameras rapidly wiped out traditional point-and-shoots. But then came the ultimate killer blow, this smartphone. Companies integrated highly advanced cameras directly into the device that was already in everyone's pocket. Consumers didn't just bypass film, they bypassed the standalone camera entirely. That final step was inevitable. Analog film demand completely collapsed, rendering Kodak's massive infrastructure of chemical labs and factories obsolete almost overnight.
Chapter 5: Kodak's Collapse.
They were truly bankrupted by the future. In 2012, the company that had defined photography for over a century officially filed for bankruptcy. Because they refused to embrace the new era early on, the digital wave they helped create ultimately rose up and drowned them. And here is the supreme, staggering irony of this whole timeline. The exact same year Kodak filed for bankruptcy, a 13-person digital photography startup called Instagram was purchased for $1 billion. That perfectly encapsulates the total shift from physical chemicals to digital pixels. Chapter 6: Lessons from a Fallen Empire. So, what are the big lessons for us today? First off, just acknowledging that a new technology exists isn't enough. You have to actively build a viable business around it. Second, you have to beware the innovator's dilemma, that intense, crippling fear of cannibalizing your own highly profitable products. And third, perhaps the most vital lesson for any modern company, whether you're in AI, automotive, or software, protecting the past will destroy your future. Successful companies must be willing to destroy their own old business models, completely tear them down before a competitor does it for them. When you're sitting at the absolute top of your industry, your greatest threat isn't your competitor, it's your own comfort. I'd love to know your thoughts on this incredible story. What tech giant's collapse should we explain next? Drop your suggestions, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.